welcome to my beautiful Unschool Life, the YouTube channel where I share with the whole world while I do something really hard and make loads of mistakes. I built my own tiny house with almost no building experience. I grow most of my own food, entirely self-taught, and I homeschool my children along a philosophy called unschooling, which by its very definition, we just make it up as we go. The number one question that people ask me is, why would you live like this? I don't have a fridge or a freezer. I don't have running water. I pee in a bucket. Why on earth would anyone choose to live the way that I live? It's kind of a leading question, but I'm going to answer it the best I can. But in order to answer why, I kind of have to answer who would live like this, because I have had a very unique life with lots of different chapters in it, and I can only explain to you why I would live like this, and I can only explain that by telling you why I am the person that I am and how I got to be the person that I am. So this video is all about me, which is a very hard video to make because I don't really tell my story very often because it's just a weird thing to do. This is a really hard video for me to make, and I've already filmed it once. I wrote a script. I wrote an entire script about everything that I should say, and I recorded it and I hated it because the thing is, I try to be as authentic as I can on this channel. I try to be real, and a script doesn't feel real or authentic. It just felt silly. I feel silly. I feel silly telling the story. So I'm gonna try a different approach and try and tell it more like we're just sitting here on my couch having a conversation, which is hard to do because I can see myself. It's very hard to be authentic when you're talking to your own face, but I'm gonna give it a go. So when someone asks the question, who would live like this? I mean, to me, there only seems to be one answer. Obviously, someone who's broken. Someone who's broken, someone who's in pain, someone who's desperate. That's who lives like this. I am sure that other people have other reasons, but I cannot understand why anyone would live like this unless they absolutely had to, unless they felt they had no other choice. And that is why I live like this, because I am broken and in pain and desperate. And I don't tell you that because I want pity or help. God knows I don't want help. I'm the worst person ever at taking help, and I don't want pity, and I'm not trying to compare myself to other people's lives. I know a lot of people have had it a heck of a lot worse than I have. I just need to tell you the story of how I became the person that I am. And to tell you the story of how I became the person that I am, I have to tell you a lot of not great things. I have to tell you about how hard it got and how dark it got. So let's give her. I grew up in the country on 4 acres, surrounded by fields and forests with random wild animals passing through. My father grew up on a farm. My mother grew up in the city. They met when they were both studying in Toronto. My father studied journalism. And as soon as he graduated, they moved to a small town and then to the country, and ultimately started a small town newspaper and a farming magazine, and had a bit of a hobby farm on the property. From my father, I got a passion for growing my own food and being self-sufficient. From living in the country, it's not a passion for nature. It's more something at the cellular level, or maybe it's the way that my neurological pathways have developed. I need space. I need to see the horizon. I need to be around. I need to hear the wind in the trees and hear the crickets singing at night. It's not a passion. It's an actual physical need. And from my father, I also got a belief that if I'm going to be on this planet. I'd better make it a better place. Even if that's just at the community level, that you make the world a better place because you're in it. And that's really informs everything that I do. From my mother, I inherited strength. I inherited the ability to keep putting one foot in front of the other, even when you're so tired and in so much pain that all you want to do is curl up and die. You keep putting one foot in front of the other. You line up a bunch of responsibilities, and those responsibilities force you to keep going forward. And that's what I learned from my mother. She was diagnosed with breast cancer when I was 14, and it was a really severe kind of breast cancer, but she didn't miss a single day of work. She had 2 separate mastectomies. She had multiple rounds of chemotherapy and radiation at a hospital that was an hour and a half drive away, and she didn't miss a day of work, as far as I can remember. So that push, that drive, that strength, I got that from my mom. I got some broken things too from my older brother. I got a trauma brain. He was 5 years older than me. He has some sort of undiagnosed personality disorder. He, on his last visit home, confessed to me that he saw me as the enemy from before I was even born. And my very first memory is lying in the crib and looking up and seeing him peek over the edge of the crib and being terrified. My parents, because they ran their own business, they were at work a lot. My sisters were quite a lot older than me, so they moved out when I was still fairly young. And so I spent a lot of time trapped at home alone with angry, violent psychopath who was twice my size. So from my brother, I inherited a hair trigger fight or flight response. it goes off at the slightest thing. I inherited the need to make sure that everyone around me is happy, because if they're not happy, I will suffer. I also inherited an inability to recognize patterns. You know that expression, insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting the same results? I do that. I'm really guilty of that. And it's because the same thing with my brother could get 2 completely different responses depending on where his brain was in that day. So I don't trust patterns. I immediately question whether a pattern is viable, and I will repeat it over and over and over. And even if 4 out of 5 times I get the same result, that 5th time, that means that it's just not a real pattern and I can't trust it. So I have a really hard time with patterns. The other traumatic event from my childhood that shaped who I am is that when I was 14, I was diagnosed with something called scoliosis, which is a curvature of the spine. When they discovered it, I had a 45-degree S-curve in my spine. Nobody noticed it for years because they thought I was just slouching. So when it was finally discovered, my parents felt very guilty, and I immediately had surgery. Actually, by the time I had surgery, it had already progressed to 54 degrees. So, to operate on scoliosis, mine was in the lumbar region. So what they did was they cut me open from here all the way to here. They cut open my ribs, they cut open my muscles, they cut open my diaphragm, they opened me right up until they could have access to my spine. They removed the discs from between my vertebrae. They put screws in the vertebrae, attached a metal rod to it, and then they torqued it to get it straight. And then once they had it straight, they filled the space between my vertebrae in with bone grafts that they had taken from my hip. And apparently they also removed a rib and ground that up and put it in between my vertebrae. And then they sewed it all up. I spent 10 days in the hospital on heavy painkillers. For 7 days, I wasn't allowed to walk. After I was released from the hospital, after 10 days, I could only, for the next 6 weeks, I was only allowed to be upright for 15 minutes at a time. I had to lie down the rest of the time. And I had to wear a brace for 4 months anytime that I was not lying down. And bugs would go inside the holes sometimes. I was 15 years old. I was a grade 10 in high school, which meant that I got left behind. My best friend was a cheerleader. She went to parties, she had boyfriends, and I was like, I had a key to the nurse's office and I went to lie down whenever I needed to. But I did find my people. I found my people in theater. So I had my first professional audition when I was 8. I got my first professional role when I was 10. When I was 13, I enrolled in the young company at the local theater, and that just became my home. And I really found sanctuary with these people. They were so creative and they were so compassionate and they were not judgmental. And that really was my safe space for most of my teenage years. In my high school, we didn't have a drama club, so my friends and I created a drama club, and we took plays to competition that we chose and we directed. We did all the work ourselves, and we still managed to win up against big schools that were really drama focused. So, theater was my life. And straight out of high school, I got into the National Theatre School of Canada, which is the most prestigious theatre school in the country. It's, if you know about Juilliard in New York, Juilliard and NTS are sister schools. So when I was 19 years old, my dad and I packed as much as we could into our van and drove 9 hours to Montreal. I had never been out of Ontario in my entire life. And in the middle of the night, I moved to Montreal. We arrived at 1 in the morning, unpacked everything into my 3rd floor apartment. My dad slept on the floor. In the morning, he went to drive 9 hours back home again, and I went to my first day of school. How to describe theater school? Oy. It was insane. Honestly, theater school was insane. The it was just a whole nother reality, and there was definitely a lot of brainwashing and gaslighting and reality being pulled out from under you. I worked really, really hard, and then when spring break came around, I got called. We all had like meetings with the director of the program, and the director of the program told me that I wasn't a good fit for the school, that they thought that I was trying too hard, and unless things changed, I would not be invited back for the second year of the program. So, coming back from spring break, of course, I tried even harder, because how do you not try hard? When you're passionate about something and you want it really badly, you try hard. That's what you do. And I was not invited back to the second year of the program. So that was devastating. It was the only thing I'd ever wanted for as long as I could remember, and my dreams were crushed so painfully that I knew I would never be able to pick them up ever again. So I went home to my mom and dad for a summer, and then I picked myself up and dusted myself off, and I moved to Toronto. I got a job waiting tables. I got a really lousy apartment in the dodgiest end of town, where people would pull over at the side of the road thinking you were a prostitute when you were just trying to cross the street. It was really questionable. But when I was waiting tables, I met a woman named Thea, who had just gotten back from a year in Australia. And she told me all about how to get a visa and how easy it was, and I should do it, and I should do it. She was really amazing and encouraging, and so I did. I got a passport, I got a work visa, I bought a ticket, and I flew to Australia. I had never been on an airplane in my entire life. I had never been out of Canada, and my first flight was 20 hours to Hong Kong, where I had a 12-hour stopover. So I spent a whole day wandering around Hong Kong, having never been out of Canada in my entire life. And then I had another 10-hour flight to Australia, and I arrived at the Sydney airport with absolutely no idea about what I was going to do. I had done no research. This was before the internet. This was before cell phones. I just sort of showed up. I called a taxi. It took me to a hostel, and off I went. So I spent like 10 months in Australia. I'm so proud of myself looking back, that my little 21-year-old self had the courage to do something like that. I met the most amazing people. I did things that I didn't think I ever had the courage to do. Like I went spelunking, like which is where you go down into a tiny little cave system and you like crawl through the cave system in the dark with a light on your head. Some of the holes that we went through were like that big. And I did it, and I was so proud of myself. And I also met a man from England named Craig, and we fell in love. We traveled together for a little while, and then at the end of our year, he went back to England and I went back to Canada, and we immediately started trying to figure out a way to be together again. So he flew to Canada and stayed with me there for about a year, but he overstayed his visa and the Canadian government threatened to deport him. So because my grandfather was born in England, I was really easily able to get a visa for England. So we went to England and we were there for 2 years. And the plan in England was to save up as much money as we could and to do a 2-year trip around the world. So we saved and we saved and we saved and we saved. And I just started finding myself getting really down on myself because my values, as I said before, was the world should be a better place because I'm in it. And working at Pizza Hut, I wasn't really making the world a better place. So I decided I wanted to go back to university. And I told Craig that that's what I wanted to do. And so we took our trip around the world, and instead of it being a 3-year trip, a 2-year trip, we squished it down to a 3-month trip. And off we went. We went to Italy, we went to China, we went to Singapore, we went to Thailand, we went to New Zealand. For 3 months, we lived the poorest possible existence out of our backpacks, eating Mr. Noodle, staying in hostels. In New Zealand, we rented a camper van, and it was not working properly. We didn't find out until later. It was freezing cold the whole time. We were sleeping with hats on and coats on, and we learned how to live rough. We learned that you don't need as many things as you think you need. You don't need as much food as you think you need. You don't need as many amenities as you think you need. You don't need to shower as often as you think you need. You don't need to wash your clothes as often as you think you need. We would just park the van at the side of the road and just sleep at the side of the road and then drive to the next location. And then when we needed to shower, we would go to a local pool, and you pay, like $4 or whatever to use the pool. And then we would go into the showers and we would do our laundry in the showers of the swimming pool, and then take our laundry back and hang it up all over inside the camper van and dry it out. We learned how to make do and to have great adventures. And that was the life that we lived. When we were in China, we bought a ring that was jade. And when we were in New Zealand, we staged engagement photos, and we sent the photos off to his parents and my parents. And that was how we announced that we were going to get married. And that's what we did. I moved to Canada. I started university in September. We got married in December. It was about a year and a half before he was legally allowed to work in Canada. So I was doing full-time university. I had a waitressing job to help pay the bills, and he just sort of stayed at home and kept the house clean and did the chores and things. And then eventually he was allowed to work, and we were a little bit more comfortable. But I spent 10 years in university in total. I did a 3-year undergrad. Then I did a year at University of Toronto because I thought that was where I wanted to do my master's. But instead, for my master's, I applied to 2 schools. So I got into Oxford, which I didn't think I was going to do. So I didn't apply for funding, and that meant I couldn't afford to go to Oxford. So that meant I couldn't go to Oxford. I ended up instead going to Ben Gurion University in Beersheba, Israel. And my master's was on the Israel-Palestine conflict. I am not going to talk about the Israel-Palestine conflict. All I can say is it absolutely broke my heart. I fell in love with people on both sides of the conflict. I recognize in them, as a fellow traumatized person, how you react to things when you've experienced something like that. And I don't know how to fix it. And so at the end of 1 year studying the Israel-Palestine conflict, I knew that there was no point in continuing in a PhD on that subject because there was honestly nothing I could do. There was nothing I could say and nothing I could contribute that would ever make anything better as far as that conflict went. So I switched my area of interest to medieval Islamic economic history. To do that, I had to teach myself Arabic and I had to teach myself Hebrew, and I had to learn how to read 14th century handwritten trade documents. I taught myself how to use a computer program called ArcGIS so I could map on the land where all of the cotton was grown and overlay weather charts. It was a really awesome, really fascinating dissertation. I had to read 150 books in 150 days and take 3 written tests and 1 oral test on them. And at the end of it, there's an elephant in the room. There's something that I haven't been mentioning. I've been all caught up in all the awesome, cool, exciting things that I did that I forgot about, like the underlying current during all of this is that I have absolutely horrible mental and physical health. So with the scoliosis came migraines. I have a curve in my spine here, and I have a steel solid rod in my lumbar spine, which means that the part of my body that's supposed to do the most bending and twisting can't bend and twist, and the bit directly above it ends up doing way more work than it should, and it pinches and it gets inflamed, and it gives me extreme amounts of pain. I've had depression since that surgery. I didn't get diagnosed until I was 17, but looking back at how I felt when I was recovering from my surgery, I had depression when I was 15. And then the whole time I was traveling around the world, I was struggling with migraines, I was struggling with depression, but I kept doing these things anyways because I learned from my mother that you put one foot in front of the other, even when you're in pain. And I still stand by that because the fact of the matter is I'll have depression if I stay in bed, and I'll have depression if I get out and do something. So I might as well be living my life with depression rather than hiding from my life with depression. When I was in Israel, I got severe anxiety. I think maybe it was everyone there is so scared and they're so hurt and they're so angry, and I could feel it. And then there's guns everywhere, and there were bombs going off in the desert. They were testing their Iron Dome missile defense system when I was there, and so 10-ton bombs were going off in the desert, and the windows were shaking, and car alarms were going off. And okay, so this is our new classroom. It's in the basement of a building which happens to double as a bomb shelter. That's the exit. Israel really broke me. And so when I came home and I started my PhD, and then a PhD is just, at the best of time, a PhD is a butt kicking. So I came into the PhD already really not in a great place, and it just got worse from there. And the harder I tried, the worse I felt, and my health just crashed. Not just my mental health, but my physical health. I kept having these horrific menstrual cycles. I would lose 3 days every month to agonizing pain, lying on the bathroom floor, passing out. It was so painful. The doctors told me that I probably had endometriosis, but if I wasn't interested in all the fertility treatments and things to try and get pregnant, then there was just nothing they could do, and I should just go on the birth control pill and get over it. And I did want to have children, but I watched my sister go through the fertility thing, and I knew I didn't want to do that. I was just going to accept it. If I was meant to have kids, I would have kids, and if I wasn't meant to have kids, I wasn't going to have kids, and that was just how it was going to be. And so when you have endometriosis, if you're not interested in actively trying to have kids, they won't even diagnose you officially with endometriosis. They just say, have some pills. So that's what they did. Have some pills. So I was in a really, 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 really horrible place when I was doing my PhD. I was really sick. And it just kept getting worse. And by the time I was entering my 4th year of my PhD, I didn't even know how I was going to finish it. I couldn't look at my computer screen. I was getting nauseous just from looking at my computer screen. And my whole PhD involved a computer program. So I didn't know how I was going to do it. And there was one day that I got so sick that I finally just closed my laptop and I went grocery shopping. And when I was in the grocery store, I started to feel weird, and like I would like look at the labels on the cans, and there was like a black hole in the middle of the label on the can, and I looked up at the person walking towards me, and there was like a black hole in the middle of their face. And this had happened to me once before for like a couple of minutes and then went away, but this one wasn't going away. So I remembered that the birth control pill that the doctor had put me on for my endometriosis was in the middle of a whole bunch of lawsuits because people died of strokes while on this birth control pill. And I went, so I quickly paid for my groceries. I got in the car. I drove home. I felt really weird the whole way. By the time when I got home, I tried to Google symptoms of a stroke, and I couldn't figure out how to work Google. Like I couldn't understand how to type or how to read. So I called 911. I couldn't remember my name. I couldn't remember my address. They told me to get an envelope that had something written on it so I could read that to them. The ambulance came. They picked me up. They rushed me off to the hospital. They asked me all sorts of questions that I didn't know how to answer. Like I couldn't remember why I had a scar on my body. The word just wasn't, I looked for the word and I couldn't find it. Eventually, my husband showed up at the hospital and he was able to answer some of the questions. They did a whole bunch of tests, a CAT scan and all this sort of stuff, and they didn't really know what it was yet. But later on in the evening, when I was able to use my words again, but I had just a crushing migraine, the doctors asked my husband to leave, and they sat down on either side of the bed, and they told me that one of the tests that they had run was a pregnancy test. And I was 3 months pregnant. And they rolled in an ultrasound machine, and I saw a little tiny Bethany inside of my body. And I had thought that I couldn't have kids for like 8 years. So this was a real shock. I had accepted that I wasn't going to have kids. I had accepted it. And here I was having to very quickly accept an entirely new reality. So I did that whole year of my PhD while getting larger and larger and larger. My body did not handle pregnancy well. Your body is supposed to move and change and adapt to accommodate for an extra human inside of it, and with a metal rod in your spine and severed abdominal muscles, my body was not good at accommodating an extra person. That pregnancy was absolutely terrible. And I was marking exams on my due date. But luckily Bethany was 2 weeks late. I had her with a home birth.
We'll move to the big one now.
How you feeling?
Okay.
Giving birth, I am great at. I would give birth 100 times over. I'm really good at giving birth. Being pregnant, absolutely no. I hated being pregnant. I hated every single second of it. It was terrible. So once Bethany came, I had to make a very difficult decision. I had already been struggling to manage my health and my PhD, and now I had to throw a baby into the mix, and I knew that I couldn't do all three, and I couldn't do anything about my health, and the baby was not going away. So I decided to drop out of my PhD, and to make money I would open a home daycare. I dropped out of my PhD, but I did not give up being an academic. So, all throughout my pregnancy and in the early years of having Bethany, I researched and researched and researched. I read every book I could get my hands on about how the brain develops, how behavior develops, what's the best way to, human psychology and child psychology and educational philosophies, all these different theories. The differences between male brains and female brains. I read like 100 books. And the more I read, the more I realized that the way that humans learn is like this, and the way that schools teach is like this. And once I knew that, I realized I couldn't possibly send my kids to school because I would constantly be beating myself up about um, about doing things the easy way when I knew that doing things the hard way was going to be better. So that was when I knew that I was going to have to homeschool. Having kids was also not good for my health, my physical health, or my mental health. After Abby was born, I was diagnosed with anxiety, and I still had depression, and they were just getting worse and worse and worse. Being around the children, the children's emotions are right on the surface. There is no ignoring them, and I pick up other people's emotions very easily. So, as much as I am good with children, children are not good for me. And so, the longer the daycare went on, the worse I got. And then I had to have another surgery. Oh, I should go back. I never told you. This is the worst. I'm terrible at this. Okay. So when I was in the hospital with the when I found out that I was pregnant with Bethany, I was rushed to the hospital in the ambulance. It turned out it was a really rare type of migraine called a hemiplegic migraine, which mimics the symptoms of a stroke. And they believed that it was caused by being on the birth control pill while pregnant. Because I'd gone on the birth control pill after I'd already gotten pregnant. That many hormones cause migraines. This was a doozy of a migraine, and I've never had one since. But to this day, I carry a piece of paper in my wallet that says, I'm having a hemiplegic migraine. Can you please phone this number and tell this person to come and pick me up? You don't need to call an ambulance. I did see a neurologist, and they said that the symptoms of a hemiplegic migraine and a stroke are almost identical, and there's no way to know which is which, except that a hemiplegic migraine will go away and a stroke won't. Which is a real problem, because the best thing to do when you're having a stroke is to go see a doctor as quickly as possible. Whereas if it's a migraine, I should just ignore it and it'll go away. Go figure. Anyway, so before I found out I was pregnant with Bethany, I did the genetic testing to find out if I had the BRCA1 mutation. Not because I was concerned about breast cancer. I was concerned about breast cancer, but my main concern was if I couldn't have kids and I was going to be suffering so much from endometriosis, I should just have a hysterectomy. And if I had the BRCA1 mutation, then I knew that our health insurance would cover a hysterectomy. So I started the genetic testing before I found out I was pregnant, and then I found out I was pregnant, and then I found out that I was pregnant with a girl, and now suddenly the BRCA1 mutation was a really important detail. And I found out that yes, I did indeed have the mutation. And when I went to consult with a geneticist, he told me I had a 90% chance of getting breast cancer, a 60% chance of getting ovarian cancer, and a 12% chance of getting a very rare, untreatable form of cervical cancer. He recommended I have it all removed as soon as I was done having children. So when Abby was 18 months old, I went in and I had both breasts, both ovaries, both fallopian tubes, my uterus and my cervix all removed all at once. I was only in the hospital for one night, and they would have sent me home that first day if I had asked, which really brought home the seriousness of my scoliosis surgery when I was 15, that I was in bed for 7 days and I didn't leave the hospital for 10 days. And this surgery, they removed 8 body parts And I was on my feet within an hour and home within a day. So that surgery went well and I recovered just fine, but it broke me even more. It was like all my sensitivities to the world around me just got turned up like 5 or 6 notches. And now suddenly all the external stimuli was just painful. The children's emotions, I felt like I was drowning in them. The noise of the city around me, I couldn't concentrate. It was so loud. I needed the horizon. I needed birds. I needed crickets. I needed space. I was just that year. I ran the daycare for another year after that surgery. And I've just finished telling you all the hard things that I've been through in my life. And that year, I don't even know how I did it. I don't even remember half of the year. I was literally just putting one foot in front of the other, like an empty shell of a person. I was dying. So finally, after a year, I put my foot down and I said, we're going to have to find money another way. I can't keep doing this. And we closed the home daycare. We sold our house in the city and we moved to the country. I started living more true to my values, being a steward of the land, planting trees, growing vegetables, raising chickens, spending as much time as I could out in nature with the kids, at the beach, in the forest, in the backyard. All of these things I could feel were healing me, but I was still living in a really poisonous marriage. And until I got out of that poisonous marriage, I knew I would never be healthy. And that is where my YouTube channel picks up. That is where I started filming in the hopes that maybe I could make an income off of YouTube. I did it! Because I had no idea how I could possibly extricate myself from a toxic relationship without sacrificing the other things that I needed to do for my mental health, for my physical health, for my children's mental and physical health. I didn't know how I could possibly keep all those balls in the air at once. It just isn't viable, especially because at the time the girl's father was saying that he would not pay me child support. He has since paid me child support every month since I left, but at the time I didn't think I would even have that. So YouTube was one of my potential solutions, but I really was stuck and I didn't know what to do. And then sort of out of the blue, right at this time, right when I really felt more stuck than I've ever felt in my life, I got an invitation from a good friend who lives in Uganda to come and homeschool their kids for a few months. And I jumped on that opportunity and I flew halfway around the world with my kids.
We're in Uganda.
Yeah, we're in Uganda.
And it really confirmed what I already knew, which was that I would be a lot healthier if I was not living with their father anymore. So when I came back, the number one mission was to figure out how to have all the things that I needed. Not wanted, needed to be a healthy person. And the rest is YouTube history. The rest has all been recorded for posterity. Trying to get out of that house. Structural rot here. Trying to build myself a place to live. Trying to learn how to grow my own food. Trying to find a way to build a life that is healthy, mentally and physically healthy for me and for my kids, with extremely limited resources. And I gotta say, I'm really, really proud of myself. I still have severe anxiety and depression. In fact, I have a bout of anxiety right now. I'm probably about 3 or 4 days into a really bad round of anxiety. And it terrifies me putting these videos up on the internet. I have anxiety about YouTube. I have anxiety about being vulnerable and sharing all of my failings on the internet, and then having somebody point out the obvious and tell me that I'm not good enough, that I'm not strong enough, that I'm not smart enough. But the thing is, I don't share these videos for them. I don't share these videos for the people who are just watching it because it's an interesting entertainment. I share these videos because somewhere out there is a person who is broken and in pain and desperate, and they don't know what to do. And I am maybe 2 steps ahead of them, or maybe 3 steps ahead of them. And when you see someone doing the hard thing that you need to do, it gives you strength. So I'm sharing this for you to give you strength, to know that maybe you can do the hard thing even when you have anxiety. I'm doing this with anxiety. I'm doing this with depression. I cannot let my fear of failure stop me from keeping marching forward and trying to make this work. Because if I did let it win, I would never get out of bed. I keep stepping forward. I keep marching forward, even when it's hard. And I need you to know that you're not alone. And when you know that you're not alone, that gives you strength. And then you comment on my video, and then I know that I'm not alone, and it gives me strength. And together we can help lift each other up. And together we can help each other walk forward and keep moving on and keep fighting the way we need to fight in order to build the life that we need to live in order to be healthy. That's why I make these videos, and that's why I'm telling this story, even though I have huge anxiety about it. And as soon as it goes up, some jerk is going to say something horrible and I'm going to spiral again. But I know that they're not important. The only people who are important are the people who are fighting the fight. So I do this for you. And I thank you so much for you giving it back and telling me that I'm not alone. Because we got to be in this together, don't we? So next week, I'm going to tell the story of why I live like this. I've touched on it a little bit in this video, but I'm going to really delve into why I live like this in next week's video. Thank you. It's been lovely hanging out with you. Take care. Bye. For those of you who stuck around right to the very end, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about one last thing. So I told you about all my surgeries. That means I had a lot of scars. I have a lot of scars. My scoliosis scars are 12 inches and 4 inches. My mastectomy scars are 6 inches and 6 inches. So ever since I had my scoliosis surgery, I always thought it would be neat to get a tattoo of some sort of vine climbing up my 1 foot long scar. And this year, with Dawn's encouragement, I went and I got a tattoo that covers all of my scars. So it's really big and I can't really afford a tattoo. It was sort of a mixture of a gift and a charitable donation. But it goes up over my shoulder. It starts down on my hip down here, and there's a root network at the bottom, and it goes all the way up. This scar up across, this scar over here, it goes up, the scar around the back. And because I'm a gardener, so it's a sweet pea vine, and I really love it. And when I look at my body now, it used to be when I looked at my body, all I saw was like a war zone. And now when I look at my body, I see something beautiful, and it makes me really happy. So that's the closest I got to a happy ending for you.